The greatest story ever told was not written in a book, but whispered across 1,000 miles of sand. For centuries, we have marveled at the silk and spices that moved between empires, but we have missed the true cargo. The vast desert caravan routes of Afro Eurasia were the world's first information highways, a living network where news traveled faster than empires could rise and ideas flowed more freely than any river. By the end of this journey, you will understand how whispers in an oasis shaped the very foundations of our modern world. How did a rumor from Baghdad reach a market in China, and what forgotten technologies crossed continents not on ships, but on the backs of camels? What does it mean to truly connect in a world of vast, silent spaces, but what exactly was traveling down this highway? To understand that, we need to separate the idea from the object. The silk and the spices, the gold and the porcelain, these were the physical cargo. The information was something else entirely. It was the invisible freight, the weightless treasure that moved alongside every bale of cloth and every sack of pepper. In our world of instant messages and satellite feeds, information feels like a commodity that can be packaged and sent. In the age of the caravan, it was a living thing, carried in the minds and the memories of the people who walked the sand. It took many forms. Around the flickering light of a desert campfire, it was oral news, the latest gossip from a distant capital, a warning about a shift in political winds, or the epic tale of a hero from a far-off land. Tucked safely in a leather saddlebag, it was a written letter, a merchant's contract, or an official dispatch from one ruler to another, sealed with wax and urgency. Carried in the humble pack of a pilgrim, it was a religious text, a new interpretation of scripture, or a prayer from a faith spreading its roots into new soil. And perhaps most powerfully, it was practical knowledge, the unspoken skill in the hands of a traveling glassblower, a weaver, or a metalworker, moving from city to city and embedding new techniques into the fabric of distant cultures. This was the true currency of the caravan routes, a flow of ideas that connected human consciousness across continents. This network had a physical skeleton, a geography of aridity that dictated every step. The great deserts of Afro Eurasia were not empty voids, but carefully mapped corridors of survival. To the west lay the Sahara, a sea of sand so vast its crossing was measured in months. To the east stretched the Arabian Peninsula, with the empty quarter posing a formidable barrier. And further east still, the Ngobi deserts of Central Asia presented a labyrinth of dunes and gravel plains under a relentless sky. Their very harshness is what created the highway. You could not wander freely in such landscapes. The lack of water, the extreme temperatures, and the shifting sands made travel a matter of life and death, forcing all movement into predictable, narrow channels. These channels were defined by geography's rare gifts. An oasis was not just a pleasant stop, it was a non-negotiable lifeline, a place where underground water breached the surface to create a pocket of palm trees and life. A mountain pass was the only way through a towering rock wall. A river valley, like the fabled Nile or the Indus, offered a thin green ribbon through an otherwise impassable brown expanse. These features became the choke points of the ancient world. A caravan master from Ghana, a merchant from Persia, a monk from India, and a soldier from China had no choice. If they wished to cross the desert, they would all eventually converge at the same handful of wells, the same mountain gates, the same river fords. This forced convergence was the secret engine of the information exchange. Imagine a bustling caravanserai, a fortified inn at a major oasis. For weeks, different groups have been traveling in isolation, each carrying the news and ideas of their homeland. Here, they are all funneled together. They share meals, they barter for supplies, they mend their equipment side by side. In this crowded, multilingual space, a story told in Arabic might be overheard by a translator traveling with a Turkish group, who then carries its essence onward toward the steppes. A new method for treating leather, demonstrated by a craftsman from Damascus, could be observed and adapted by a trader from Samarkand. The geography did not just create a route for goods, it created a forced mixing chamber for human minds. The desert, by being so inhospitable, built the very meeting places where cultures could touch. Think of the largest caravan not as a simple line of camels, but as a floating city on the move. This was a complex, self-sufficient society that had to carry its entire world with it, capable of surviving for months in landscapes that offered nothing. At its heart was a strict hierarchy, a chain of command as vital as water. The caravan master was the undisputed captain of this desert ship. His word was law, his experience was the map, and his judgment decided the fate of every person and every precious ounce of cargo. He negotiated with local rulers for safe passage, set the punishing daily pace, and chose the exact moment to halt at a life-giving oasis. Beneath him moved a small army of specialists. Wealthy merchants, the financiers of the journey, traveled with their own entourages and guarded chests, but even they deferred to the master's knowledge of the sands. Then came the guards, often hired from nomadic tribes who knew the language of the desert and the threat of raiders. Their presence was a silent promise of security, allowing the exchange of sensitive ideas to happen without fear. The animal handlers, the unsung heroes, possessed a deep, intuitive understanding of every camel and donkey, knowing which were strong, which were ill, and how to coax one more mile from a weary beast. And most crucially, the guides. These individuals carried landscapes in their minds. They could read the stars not for philosophy, but for direction. They remembered the shape of a specific dune, the taste of a particular well's water, and the location of a hidden rock formation that meant shelter from a killing storm. This operational skeleton existed for one purpose, to protect the life within, and that life was astonishingly diverse. Yes, the core was trade, but walking alongside the merchants were scholars seeking lost texts, pilgrims on a sacred journey to distant shrines, diplomats carrying sealed treaties between empires, and families fleeing hardship, hoping for a new beginning in a faraway land. This was the true vessel of the information highway. A Buddhist monk from China might share a medical scroll with a Persian physician. A storyteller from Egypt could captivate a circle of listeners from India with a tale that would, in time, become woven into their own local folklore. Around the evening fire, a refugee from a fallen city would recount its last days, and that news, carried by a merchant heading west, would become vital intelligence for another kingdom. The caravan was a sealed capsule of human experience, rolling through the emptiness. For the duration of the journey, these people from wildly different worlds ate the same food, faced the same dangers, and slept under the same vast canopy of stars. In that forced intimacy, guarded by shared hardship, information ceased to be a mere commodity. It became a story told for comfort, a skill traded for friendship, a prayer learned out of respect. The desert did not just carry goods, it carried conversations, and those conversations quietly remade the world. The true magic of this system, however, happened not on the endless march, but at the journey's essential pauses. The caravan routes were dotted with a specific type of architecture, a building so vital it became the beating heart of the entire network. This was the Caravanserai. From the outside, it looked like a fortress, and that was its first function. A high, windowless wall of sun-baked mud brick or stone rose from the desert floor, offering a stark promise of safety in a landscape of uncertainty. Its single heavy gate would swing shut at dusk, locking out the dangers of the night, whether they were bandits or the desert's own predatory creatures. Inside those walls, however, was an entire world dedicated to the mechanics of connection. Think of it not as a simple hotel, but as the ancient world's version of a server hub, a place where the information carried by the caravans was uploaded, downloaded, and synced. Once inside the gate, you entered a vast central courtyard. This open space was a chaotic symphony of purpose. In one corner, animals were being unloaded, their groans and complaints echoing off the walls as handlers tended to sore feet and distributed precious fodder. In another, blacksmiths hammered at glowing metal, repairing broken harness rings and shoeing camels for the next leg. Along the arched arcades that lined the courtyard, merchants spread their goods on blankets, engaging in the frantic multilingual barter that set prices for commodities across continents. Upstairs, in small, Spartan rooms, travelers collapsed onto simple mats for their first real rest in days. The Caravanserai was a repair center, a marketplace, a veterinary clinic, and a hostel, all functioning at once. But its most profound role was as a communal living room for the world. For the first time since their last stop, people from utterly different origins were forced into close, prolonged contact. A Persian merchant, a Chinese official, a Berber guide, and a Greek scholar would find themselves drawing water from the same well, sharing a meal of the same simple stew, and sleeping under the same roof. This was not a curated diplomatic meeting. It was the messy, organic collision of humanity that the desert highway engineered. In this neutral, secure space, the information that had traveled in isolation began to mix. News was the most immediate currency. A traveler from the West might share that a certain kingdom's ruler had passed, changing the political landscape. Someone from the East could report on the progress of a distant war or the success of a harvest. These were not just stories, they were vital data points that influenced trade decisions and travel routes. Beyond news, ideas themselves were exchanged. A scholar, taking advantage of the safety and the stationary moment, might unroll a precious manuscript in the candlelight to continue his studies. Another, seeing a text in an unfamiliar script, would lean in with curiosity. This often led to impromptu translation sessions, where concepts from one language were painstakingly explained and transcribed into another. A debate about philosophy or astronomy could spark between two educated travelers who would never have met in their home cities. A musician might play a strange, haunting melody on an instrument the others had never seen, and that tune would be carried forward, subtly changing as it moved. The Caravanserai was where the specialized knowledge of the glassblower or the mathematician ceased to be a secret and began its journey to becoming common heritage. It was a place of inevitable, unplanned conversation, where every shared meal and every evening of rest was also an act of global connection, quietly weaving the separate threads of distant cultures into a single, intricate tapestry. Within the secure walls of the Caravanserai, a deeper challenge emerged from the beautiful chaos of a dozen different tongues. How could a mathematical theorem, a medical procedure, or a subtle point of theology survive a journey across a continent when no single traveler spoke every language along the way? The desert highways solved this with a brilliant, pragmatic innovation, the creation of shared linguistic bridges. Over centuries, certain languages rose above their native borders to become the common currency of conversation. In the western reaches of the network, Aramaic served this purpose for empires, its script carrying administrative decrees and merchant accounts. Later, Greek became a vessel for philosophy and science, its terms for geometry and logic recognized from Egypt to Bactria. As the heart of the network shifted, Persian emerged as the language of poetry and high culture from Istanbul to Delhi, while Arabic, propelled by the spread of its script and sacred texts, became the preeminent language of scholarship, law, and science across the southern routes. These were not languages that replaced local dialects. Instead, they layered over them. A merchant might speak Catalan at home, use a pidgin of Italian for Mediterranean trade, but switch to a functional Arabic to negotiate a contract with a partner from Baghdad. This shared tongue was the operating system of the information highway, allowing data to be uploaded in one location and downloaded in another, thousands of miles away, with its core meaning intact. The real architects of this exchange, however, were the human nodes in the network, the translators and scribes. They were far more than simple word substitutes. A skilled translator traveling with a caravan was a diplomat, a cultural interpreter, and a guardian of accuracy. His role was to ensure that a complex idea about astronomy did not degenerate into a vague story about stars by the time it reached its destination. These individuals often possessed deep, specialized knowledge themselves. A scribe might be fluent in Sanskrit and Arabic, allowing him to meticulously copy a medical text on herbal remedies, preserving not just the words, but the precise instructions for dosage and preparation. Diplomats, moving under the protection of royal seals, carried messages between courts that required absolute clarity, where a mistranslated phrase could mean the difference between an alliance and a war. Their work ensured that when a Persian scholar cited a Greek philosopher or a Chinese alchemist referenced an Indian formula, the intellectual chain remained unbroken. This linguistic infrastructure meant that the most fragile cargo, the abstract thought, could travel with remarkable fidelity. A new number system from India, the concept of zero, could be accurately explained in Arabic numerals and adopted by mathematicians in North Africa. A philosophical debate born in the academies of Athens could be carefully rendered into Syriac, then Arabic, and later still into Latin, its logical structure surviving the journey across deserts and centuries. The caravan routes did not just move things, they moved meaning, and they built the very tools required to keep that meaning alive. Yet the most powerful convergence of all was not a commercial hub, but a sacred one. Every year, the desert witnessed a phenomenon of staggering scale, a human migration that temporarily rewired the entire information network. This was the pilgrimage, and for the Islamic world, its ultimate destination was Mecca. The Hajj was far more than a spiritual journey. It was the single greatest recurring information exchange the ancient world ever engineered. Imagine the logistical reality. For months, caravans formed not around a merchant's ledger, but around a shared faith. From the farthest corners of the known world, from the cities of Andalusia in Spain to the ports of the Malay archipelago, from the bustling markets of West Africa to the scholarly centers of Central Asia, hundreds of thousands of Muslims began the long, arduous trek. They traveled in massive, organized groups, each caravan a microcosm of its home region. A pilgrim from Timbuktu might walk for over a year, a scholar from Cairo would join a flotilla on the Nile before crossing the desert, and a trader from Samarkand would follow the old Silk Road south. Their paths were the very same trade routes we have discussed, but now pulsing with a singular, unified purpose. When these countless streams of humanity finally converged on the sands around Mecca, they created something extraordinary, a temporary, cosmopolitan city that existed for only a few weeks. Here, a jurist from Cordoba could debate points of Islamic law with a theologian from Baghdad. A poet from Persia could recite verses to an audience that included listeners from India and Somalia. A doctor from Damascus might share a new surgical technique with a colleague from China whom he would never have met otherwise. The pilgrimage flattened the world. Social hierarchies blurred in the simple white garments worn by all. Linguistic barriers were overcome through the shared rituals and the common scholarly languages of Arabic and Persian. In the crowded camps and around the holy sites, news traveled at the speed of conversation. Word of a new ruler in Delhi, a rebellion in North Africa, or a shift in trade policy in the Mediterranean spread through the pilgrim masses with breathtaking efficiency. This was not idle gossip. It was vital intelligence that would directly affect economies and alliances across continents. More subtly, technological insights flowed alongside prayers. A pilgrim from a region skilled in water management, like Yemen or Persia, might observe the arrangements for providing for the massive crowd and carry those engineering ideas home. A new design for a navigational instrument, a more efficient loom, or an innovative agricultural practice could be described, sketched in the sand, and committed to memory. After the rituals were complete, this vast, temporary city dissolved as quickly as it formed. But the pilgrims did not return home empty-handed. They carried back more than spiritual renewal. Each person became a living library, a vessel of news, ideas, and cultural practices absorbed during those intense weeks of global communion. A scholar returned to his madrasa with new texts and interpretations. A merchant went back to his networks in Mali with first-hand reports on political stability in the Levant. A craftsman brought a novel tool design back to his workshop in Gujarat. In this way, the annual pilgrimage acted as a colossal heartbeat for the information highway. Once a year, it drew knowledge from every capillary of the network into a single, pulsing center, mixed it thoroughly in an unparalleled human crucible, and then pumped it back out, refreshed and redistributed to the farthest reaches of the globe. The desert had created the roots, but faith provided the rhythm that kept the world's knowledge in constant, renewing circulation. While the pilgrimage was a temporary convergence, other nodes in the network were built to endure. Alongside the bustling Caravanserai stood quieter, more permanent sanctuaries for knowledge. Dotting the desolate stretches of the Silk Road were monastic outposts, islands of scholarship in a sea of sand. These were not just places of prayer, they were fortified libraries, translation bureaus, and universities rolled into one, serving as the hard drives of the ancient information highway. Nestorian Christian monasteries, for example, were established from Persia all the way to China. To a weary caravan traveler, their walls offered more than spiritual solace. They offered access to something priceless, a collection of manuscripts. Within these scriptoriums, monks meticulously texts not only on theology, but on medicine, astronomy, and philosophy, often translating them from Greek or Syriac into local languages like, or eventually Chinese. A merchant from Constantinople, carrying a damaged Greek text on geometry, could find a monk scholar capable of repairing it, translating its contents, or simply providing a safe copy for the next leg of the journey. These monasteries became neutral ground where the intellectual traditions of the Mediterranean, Persia, and the Far East could meet, be compared, and be synthesized. The exchange was a two-way street. Travelers deposited new texts from distant lands, enriching the monastery's collection, while the resident scholars provided copies, summaries, or verbal explanations to those moving onward. In this way, a single monastery acted as a permanent relay station, ensuring that a stream of ideas did not fade when a particular caravan passed, but was instead captured, preserved, and made available for the next wave of travelers. Perhaps the most spectacular example of this is the caves at. This was not a single building, but an entire cliff face honeycombed with hundreds of grottos, a spiritual and scholarly complex created over 1,000 years. Located at a critical junction of the Silk Road, where the northern and southern routes converged before entering China, was a mandatory stop. Its caves were lavishly decorated with Buddhist art, serving as places of worship and meditation for pilgrims from every direction. But they also housed an immense library, a cache of tens of thousands of manuscripts, scrolls, and paintings in a bewildering array of languages, including Chinese, Tibetan, Sanskrit, and even Hebrew. This treasure trove was not hidden away. It was actively used. Scribes worked within the complex, translating Buddhist sutras from Sanskrit into Chinese and Tibetan. Traveling scholars could consult texts on astrology, history, or poetry. A trader from Samarkand might commission a prayer scroll for safe travel, while a Chinese official could deposit a diplomatic document for a monk to translate into for a Central Asian Khan. The caves functioned as a colossal cultural capacitor, storing the intellectual and spiritual charge of centuries of passing caravans. When a traveler entered one of these monastic complexes, they were accessing a living database, one that had been compiled by every traveler who came before them. The resident monks and scribes were the system administrators, curating the flow, ensuring the data was not lost to time or the desert wind. In these quiet, candlelit chambers, far from any palace or capital, the raw information of the caravan routes was refined, cross-referenced, and given lasting form. The desert highways moved knowledge, but these scholarly oases gave it a permanent address. The quiet work of monastic scribes preserved knowledge, but empires needed to command it. The same desert highways that carried whispered news and scholarly texts presented a tantalizing possibility to every ambitious ruler. What if you could control the flow of information, making it move not at the pace of a laden camel, but at the speed of a galloping horse? This vision led to the world's first state-sponsored communication networks, systems built directly atop the caravan routes that transformed them from organic pathways into instruments of power. From the sands of Persia to the hills of Rome, empires constructed official postal systems, recognizing that controlling messages meant controlling the fate of nations. The Persian Empire under rulers like the Great established the system, a network of relay stations spaced a day's ride apart. At each station, a fresh horse and a rested rider stood ready. A courier would arrive, his mount lathered and exhausted, hand over his sealed packet, and watch as a new rider seized it and vanished down the road in a cloud of dust. This chain of human and animal links could carry a royal decree from the heart of the empire to its most distant province in a matter of days, a journey that would take a merchant caravan weeks or even months. The message itself was often verbal, a memorized dispatch spoken from one trusted courier to the next, ensuring secrecy and speed. The Roman Empire built a similar marvel. This was not a public service, but the imperial government's private nervous system. It used a vast network of maintained roads and to move officials, military reports, and tax records. Scale was staggering, with thousands of horses, wagons, and dedicated personnel maintained at state expense solely to keep information flowing to and from the capital. But perhaps the most formidable system ever created was the Yam of the Mongol Empire. In the 13th century, the Mongols ruled the largest contiguous land empire in history, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Europe. Governing such a colossal territory was impossible without instantaneous communication. The Yam was their solution, a logistical masterpiece that turned the entire Silk Road into a coordinated information circuit. Relay stations were placed approximately every 20 to 30 miles across the empire, each stocked with horses, fodder, food, and dedicated attendants. A Mongol courier, bearing a tablet of authority called could ride at a relentless pace, switching horses at each station without ever stopping for rest. The system was so efficient that some reports suggest a message could travel from the Mongolian heartland to Eastern Europe in just 10 days, a speed that would not be reliably matched until the 19th century. These were not just mail services, they were the absolute pinnacle of the Desert Information Highway, now fully militarized and bureaucratized. They carried the lifeblood of empire, military intelligence about rebel movements, sealed orders for troop deployments, detailed census data for taxation, and diplomatic correspondence with foreign courts. The investment was enormous, consuming vast state resources, but the return was incalculable: stability and control. This infrastructure also had an unintended consequence. While built for command, it also provided a safer, faster, and more predictable passage for everyone else. A merchant caravan could plan its journey using the known locations of these imperial, often finding shelter and a measure of security in their shadow. A scholar or a pilgrim, while not using the official couriers, benefited from the patrolled routes and mapped distances the system created. The imperial postal networks did not replace the organic, chaotic exchange of the Caravanserai. Instead, they laid a high-speed track right beside it, proving that the true value of the desert was not in the gold it carried, but in the speed with which a single, crucial thought could cross it. But alongside the galloping couriers of imperial post, another kind of official traveler moved with deliberate, ceremonial purpose. These were the diplomats, the royal envoys and ambassadors whose very presence on the caravan routes signaled a conversation between crowns. They were not mere messengers, they were walking extensions of their sovereign's court, and their journeys transformed the information highway into a formal channel for high-stakes dialogue. A Byzantine emperor, seeking to navigate the complex politics of the steppes, would dispatch a carefully chosen nobleman with a retinue of translators, scholars, and guards. This envoy did not travel light. He carried a letter, but it was no simple note. It was a masterpiece of political rhetoric, crafted on the finest parchment, sealed with imperial wax, and full of nuanced language meant to convey friendship, warning, or a proposed alliance. More powerfully, he brought gifts, and these were never random. A shipment of exquisite purple silk, a color reserved for royalty in Constantinople, was a statement of wealth and status. A set of intricate gold chalices demonstrated artistic mastery. A caged lion or hunting falcon symbolized power and nobility. Each object was a carefully chosen word in a silent, material language, speaking volumes about the culture and intentions of the giver. When a Muslim caliph sent a delegation to the Tang court in China, the procession was a mobile exhibition. They brought astronomical instruments, medical texts, and elaborately decorated weapons, each item silently communicating the sophistication of Islamic science and craftsmanship. Upon arrival, the diplomat's role was to interpret this language of objects, to present the gifts with the proper ceremony, and to engage in the intricate dance of negotiation. But his duties did not end there. He was also a professional observer. Every detail of his journey was potential intelligence. The strength of fortifications in a border region, the mood of the local populace, the health of the agricultural land, the readiness of soldiers he passed, all of this was mentally recorded. Upon his return, he would deliver not just a reply from the foreign ruler, but a comprehensive report, a first-hand account that would shape his own empire's foreign policy for years to come. These reports are some of our most valuable historical windows. They tell us not just what was said at court, but what was seen on the road, the unofficial news that never made it into official chronicles. Through the eyes of these diplomats, we learn about the stability of distant kingdoms, the rise of new trading partners, and even the spread of religious movements. They were the trusted censors of the state, feeding vital information back into the heart of power, proving that the most important cargo on the desert highway was sometimes a single, well-informed mind returning home. The imperial courier rode with urgent words, but the caravan bore a different kind of weight. It carried entire worlds bound in leather and ink. The most precious cargo on the information highway was not a rumor or a memory, but a physical book, and its journey from author to reader was a monumental feat of human labor and economic calculation. This was the manuscript economy, the tangible backbone of intellectual exchange. Before the printing press, every single book in existence was a unique, handmade object. Its creation began with the material itself. In the Mediterranean and European worlds, the skin of calves, sheep, or goats was meticulously scraped, soaked, and stretched to become parchment, a durable but expensive surface. Further east, a revolutionary material had taken hold. Paper, invented in China and perfected by Islamic artisans, traveled west along the caravan routes. Made from pulped linen or hemp, it was more affordable, flexible, and absorbent than parchment, and its adoption in cities like Samarkand and Baghdad fueled an explosion of scholarship by making writing surfaces more accessible. Upon these blank sheets worked the scribe. This was not a casual profession, but a highly skilled craft. A master scribe possessed a steady hand, profound literacy, and immense patience. He would sit for hours, perhaps in the quiet scriptorium of a monastery or in a bustling workshop attached to a great library, copying text letter by perfect letter. He used a reed pen and ink made from soot or gall nuts, and the work was slow. A single, dense volume of philosophy could take many months to complete. This labor was expensive, making books objects of significant wealth. In the great intellectual capitals of Baghdad, Cairo, and Samarkand, a thriving economy grew around this production. Wealthy patrons, often caliphs, viziers, or prosperous merchants, would commission copies of desired works. They funded libraries, called houses of wisdom, which acted as both repositories and factories for knowledge. A scholar in Cairo might request a specific medical treatise by the Persian physician Al. His request would travel via merchant networks to Baghdad, where a library held a master copy. There, a scribe would be paid to create a duplicate. This new copy then became a commodity. It would be carefully wrapped against the elements, placed in a protective cylinder, and entrusted to a caravan merchant specializing in valuable, low-bulk goods. Its transport was a calculated risk. The merchant knew that delivering this single, weightless item to the scholar in Cairo could bring a profit far greater than a bale of silk, because it carried not just text, but exclusive access to cutting-edge thought. The most sought-after manuscripts were those on medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy. A new star chart from an observatory in, or a refined surgical manual from Andalusia represented the absolute frontier of understanding. To possess it was to possess power, both intellectual and practical. Rulers wanted the latest engineering manuals for building siege engines or managing water. Physicians needed the most current to treat the elite. This demand created a tangible flow of intellectual capital that mirrored the flow of spices. A caravan leaving Samarkand might carry bolts of cloth, bags of lapis lazuli, and a sealed chest containing 3 newly manuscripts on algebra, optics, and geography. Their destinations were separate cities, their buyers men who had never met, yet they were all connected by this silent, slow-moving river of ink. Each manuscript that survived the desert journey was a miracle of dedication, a node of light carried across the dark expanse, waiting to be kindled in the mind of a reader 1,000 miles away. A book's journey relied on the very surface it was written upon. The westward march of papermaking stands as the perfect testament to how the caravan routes moved not just information, but the revolutionary technology to record it. This was a tangible process, a series of hands teaching hands across deserts and decades. It began in China, where for centuries paper had been crafted from mulberry bark, hemp, and old rags, pulped and pressed into sheets. This knowledge was a closely guarded state secret, a source of immense cultural power. But secrets have a way of traveling, especially along roads filled with curious minds. The turning point arrived in the 8th century, following a moment of military conflict near the Talas River in Central Asia. Among those captured by the victorious Abbasid forces were Chinese artisans skilled in the craft. Rather than being imprisoned, their expertise was recognized as a prize more valuable than gold. They were brought to the burgeoning intellectual center of Samarkand, a bustling caravanserai of a city where the East truly met the West. Here, under the patronage of local rulers, these artisans established the first paper mills outside of China. They adapted the technique to local materials, using linen and flax, and harnessed the power of the region's flowing streams to drive the heavy stamping mills that pulped the fibers. Samarkand paper soon became famous for its smooth, strong, creamy white quality, and the city itself became synonymous with the product. From this single node, the technology rippled outward along the information highway. It traveled to Baghdad, where the House of Wisdom's insatiable demand for writing material fueled its adoption. It moved to Damascus, whose fine paper, known as charta, was exported across the Mediterranean. It reached Cairo and Fez, and eventually, through the Islamic networks in Sicily and Spain, the knowledge crossed into Europe. By the 12th century, paper mills were operating in Italy, and the technology slowly spread northward. This was not a simple theft of an idea. It was a slow, meticulous transmission of a complex, hands-on technical process. The knowledge of which fibers to use, how to ferment them, the precise construction of molds and felts, and the methods for sizing the sheets to hold ink. All of this practical, non-verbal understanding had to be carried in the minds of skilled workers and translated into new environments. The caravan routes provided the corridor for this migration, connecting the regions where flax and linen were plentiful with the urban centers desperate for a cheaper, more efficient writing surface than fragile papyrus or costly parchment. Paper democratized knowledge. It made books more affordable and correspondence more practical, exponentially increasing the volume of information that could be recorded and sent along those very same routes. Even more intriguing is the shadow that follows this story, the whisper of another technology. Block printing, also developed in China, may have traveled a similar, though less documented, path. While the movable type press would be a European innovation centuries later, the core concept of carving a page of text or an image onto a wooden block, inking it, and pressing it onto paper likely moved westward alongside paper itself. We see echoes of it in the production of patterned textiles in the Islamic world and later in the playing cards and religious images that began appearing in Europe before. The information highway, in its most profound achievement, did not just carry the message. It delivered the factory, the very means to produce the medium, forever altering the landscape of human thought. Yet the most ambitious project of the information highway was not a single journey, but a deliberate, state-sponsored act of intellectual gathering. In the 9th century, the beating heart of this network was Baghdad, the glittering capital of the Abbasid Caliphate. Here, the caliphs built something unprecedented, a grand institution called the House of Wisdom. It was more than a library, it was a factory for knowledge, and its primary mission was translation on a scale the world had never seen. The caravan routes provided the raw material. Scholars at the House of Wisdom sought out every text they could find on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. Agents were sent along the trade roads with orders to acquire manuscripts. From the Byzantine Empire to the west came the works of Greek masters, the logical treatises of Aristotle, the medical theories of Galen, the geometric proofs of Euclid. From the caravan cities of Persia arrived ancient texts on statecraft, literature, and astronomy. From the east, via the bustling crossroads of Central Asia, came the groundbreaking mathematical and medical knowledge of India, including the revolutionary concept of zero and the decimal system. These precious scrolls and codices, carried for months by merchants and diplomats, arrived in Baghdad as fragile, singular treasures, often written in languages few in the city could read. The House of Wisdom became a linguistic refinery. Under the patronage of the Caliph, a team of multilingual scholars, many of them Nestorian Christians, Jews, and Persians fluent in Greek, Syriac, Persian, and Sanskrit, set to work. Their task was not just word-for-word substitution, but a profound act of cultural transmission. They debated the precise Arabic term for a Greek philosophical concept. They devised new vocabulary to describe Indian astronomical observations, and they wrote extensive commentaries to explain the context to an Arabic-speaking audience. This was a systematic, funded effort to capture the entire intellectual heritage of the known world and make it accessible. The result was an explosion of new thought. Once these foundational works were translated, Islamic scholars did not merely preserve them, they built upon them. The mathematician Al, working with Indian numerals, formulated the principles of algebra. The physician Al synthesized Greek and Persian medicine to write a monumental encyclopedia of clinical practice. The astronomer Al made precise observations that refined Ptolemy's models. The translated knowledge became a platform for original discovery. And then the information highway reversed its flow. The new works composed in Arabic, along with copies of the translated classics, began traveling back out along the very same caravan routes that had brought the originals. A merchant heading to Cordoba might carry a copy of Al's algebra text. A pilgrim returning to could bring a medical compendium by Al. These Arabic language works became the new standard texts, spreading from Islamic Spain to the borders of China, fueling what we now call the Islamic Golden Age. The desert highways had always carried whispers, but the House of Wisdom turned those whispers into a sustained, coherent conversation, proving that the true power of a network lies not in moving goods, but in translating thought, and then sending it back out, richer and more vital than before. This intellectual exchange in Baghdad was mirrored by a quieter, more profound movement along the eastern stretches of the highway. A philosophy born in the forests of India was making its way, step by patient step, across the roof of the world, carried not by soldiers or merchants, but by the most dedicated travelers of all. Buddhist monks became the ultimate information specialists of the Silk Road. Their journey was the message. leaving the monastic universities of India. They joined caravans heading north into the high passes of the Himalayas and the relentless deserts of Central Asia. They traveled light, often with just a begging bowl and a single precious text. Their presence offered a different kind of security to a caravan, a spiritual reassurance in a landscape of mortal danger, and in return, the caravan offered them physical protection and a known path. Their destination was not a market, but a mind. They sought to bring the teachings of the Buddha, the Dharma, to new lands. The first great hubs for this transmission were the oasis cities that dotted the desert, places and these were not mere stops, they were linguistic and cultural laboratories. A monk from speaking a form of Sanskrit would arrive in a city where the local population spoke Tocharian, or, to teach, he had to learn. He would begin the slow, meticulous work of translation, often with the help of local converts who were bilingual. This was not a simple act of swapping words. Concepts like nirvana or karma had no direct equivalent in Central Asian languages. Translators had to find phrases, use metaphors, and sometimes create entirely new terms to capture the subtlety of the original teaching. A single sutra, a discourse attributed to the Buddha, could take years to accurately render. These oasis cities became permanent for the faith, where texts were translated and then sent further eastward with the next wave of monk travelers. The final gateway into China was the oasis of. Here, at the edge of the Chinese world, the translation work reached a monumental scale. In the cave temples that honeycombed the cliffs, teams of monks worked for generations. A text might arrive from India in Sanskrit, be translated first into a Central Asian language by a monk from, and then finally into classical Chinese by a team that included both foreign monks and learned Chinese scholars. This layered process ensured the teachings were not just translated, but transliterated into a Chinese philosophical context. But the transmission was not only textual. Buddhism is a richly visual tradition, and its art traveled the same roads. In the caves of and other sites, we see this adaptation unfold in stunning color. Early Buddhist art from India depicted the Buddha in idealized human form, wearing draped robes that echoed Greek influences from earlier contacts. As this iconography moved east, it began to change. In Central Asia, the Buddha's face might take on local features, his robes becoming more reminiscent of the clothing of a merchant prince. By the time the artistic ideas reached China, the transformation was profound. The Buddha's form softened, his expression often becoming more serene and inward, reflecting ideals of harmony. In some Chinese depictions, he even began to resemble a wise, gentle scholar, a figure that resonated deeply with Confucian values of reverence for teachers. This was not a dilution of the faith, but its profound integration. The caravan routes allowed for the transmission of an entire ecosystem of belief, the scriptures, the meditation practices, the monastic rules, and the artistic language to express it all. A Chinese pilgrim walking into a cave temple would encounter a universe of thought that had journeyed thousands of miles. He could read the sutras in his own language, meditate before a painted Buddha that felt familiar yet exalted, and receive instruction from a monk whose own journey mirrored the spiritual path, long, arduous, and transformative. Buddhism did not conquer China through force. It arrived on foot, one oasis at a time, carried on the same winds that filled the sails of the sand. The same pathways that carried silk and algebra could also transmit a far more lethal form of information. In the middle of the 14th century, the interconnected world of Afro Eurasia faced a terrible demonstration of its own profound connectivity. The outbreak, often called the Black Death, serves as a grim case study, revealing how the caravan network, so efficient at moving ideas, could also function as a superhighway for biological catastrophe. The most widely accepted path of the pandemic begins in the steppes of Central Asia, where the bacterium that causes bubonic plague was endemic among local rodent populations. These rodents, and the fleas that lived on them, were not stationary. They traveled as stowaways, hidden within bales of fur, wool, and cloth that were standard cargo on the east-west caravans. A single infected flea, nestled in the pelt of a marmot packed in a trader's saddlebag, became an unwitting agent of global change. The caravan routes provided the perfect, slow-moving vector, offering these infected hosts a steady supply of new rodent populations at each oasis and caravanserai along the way. The disease moved at the pace of commerce, creeping from hinterland villages to major trading hubs. A critical junction in this story was the Black Sea port of in the Crimea, a bustling Genoese trading colony. Here, the overland caravan routes from the east met the maritime networks of the Mediterranean. In 1346, according to chroniclers of the time, a Mongol army besieging the city may have inadvertently introduced the plague. While the details are debated by historians, the outcome is stark. From Genoese merchant ships, their holds possibly carrying infected rats or fleas alongside their usual cargo, set sail for home. They made landfall in Sicily, then moved to the ports of mainland Italy, Marseille, and Barcelona. Within a matter of months, the disease had transitioned from a slow overland creep to a rapid maritime explosion, leaping from the caravan terminals to the heart of Europe. The speed and reach of the pandemic were a direct, tragic function of the information highway's efficiency. A rumor from Samarkand might take a year to reach London, but a biological agent, traveling silently in the same caravans and on the same ships, could cover the same distance in a fraction of the time. The very nodes that facilitated cultural exchange, the crowded caravanserais and bustling ports, became amplifiers of suffering, their density ensuring the pathogen found abundant new hosts. This was the network's darkest potential realized, not for carrying knowledge, but for distributing a form of information written in genetic code, one that reshaped societies, economies, and the very course of history on a continental scale. The desert wines that once carried the scent of spices now seemed to carry a silent, invisible warning about the double-edged nature of connection. For all the caravans that crossed the deserts, there was one group who did not simply use the highway, they were the highway. The vast steppes and deserts were not empty spaces to be traversed, but living homelands, and the nomadic peoples who moved across them were the indispensable architects of the entire system. Groups like the Berbers of the Sahara, the Bedouins of Arabia, and the myriad tribes of the Central Asian steppe were far more than guides or guards. They were the active, intelligent substrate upon which the information network was built. Their power came from a knowledge so intimate it was written in the land itself. A Bedouin guide could taste the wind and know if a sandstorm was brewing hours before it arrived. A Berber caravan leader could find a hidden well by the specific pattern of vegetation on a distant dune. A Mongol horseman could navigate the featureless grasslands by reading the stars and the behavior of the wildlife. This was not map knowledge, it was lived experience passed down through generations, and it made them the ultimate custodians of the routes. They controlled the critical segments, the mountain passes, the rare watering holes, the safe corridors between shifting sands. A merchant caravan could not simply march through their territory. Passage was negotiated, a toll was paid, or a partnership was formed. This relationship was the true engine of security. A powerful nomadic confederation, by bringing many tribes under a single banner, could transform a dangerous, fractured journey into a secure, predictable passage. They would police the routes against smaller, rogue bands of raiders, ensuring that the caravans and the priceless information they carried moved without constant threat. The most spectacular example of this was the rise of the Mongol Empire. Before their unification under Khan, the Silk Road was a patchwork of local kingdoms and rival tribes, each extracting its own tolls and presenting its own dangers. The Mongol conquests, while reshaping the political map, did something extraordinary for the flow of information. They created a single, vast police space from the Pacific to the Mediterranean. The famed Pax, the Mongol peace, was not an era of perfect tranquility, but it was a period of drastically lowered transaction costs. The Yam postal system we discussed was the ultimate expression of this, but its benefits extended to every merchant and pilgrim. For the first time, a trader could travel from Beijing to Tabriz with a single set of travel documents, under the protection of a single imperial authority. The Mongol Khans actively encouraged commerce, understanding that taxing a flourishing trade was more profitable than looting a broken one. They repaired bridges, built caravanserais, and executed bandits who threatened the roads. This unprecedented security had a direct and profound effect on the exchange of ideas. It enabled the journeys of figures like Marco Polo, but more importantly, it allowed for the unimpeded movement of scholars, diplomats, and technologies across continents. A Nestorian Christian monk could travel from Baghdad to the Mongol court inn to debate religion. Persian astronomers could bring their instruments to work in observatories in China. Medical knowledge from the Islamic world flowed eastward, while Chinese innovations in printing and gunpowder began their journey west. The nomads, often viewed by settled societies as outsiders or destroyers, became, in their moment of supreme political organization, the greatest facilitators of connection the ancient world had ever seen. They proved that the information highway required more than just a path, it required a guardian, and sometimes, the most effective guardian was the one who knew every stone and every secret of the silent, open road. The desert highways left no maps behind. Our understanding of this invisible network is a work of historical reconstruction, a puzzle assembled from fragments that whisper rather than shout. While a broken piece of Song dynasty porcelain or a hoard of Roman coins offers clear, physical proof of trade, the flow of information is a ghost in the archaeological record. You cannot dig up a conversation or unearth a rumor. So how do we chart the paths of ideas? Historians become detectives, following subtle clues left in language, on paper, and in the stories of those who walked the sands. One of the most persistent traces is linguistic. Words travel with people, and their adoption into new languages marks a route of deep cultural contact. Consider the English word sugar, which comes from the Arabic, which itself came from the Persian, tracing a clear line from the cane fields of India through the markets of Persia and the Islamic world before arriving in Europe. The spread of paper-making technology is echoed in the word itself, moving from the Chinese to the Persian and eventually into European languages. These borrowed terms are like fossilized footprints of an idea's journey. Another vital clue is manuscript provenance, the documented history of a single book. By studying where a manuscript was, who owned it, and what marginal notes were added in different hands and languages, scholars can reconstruct its physical journey across continents, turning a static object into a narrative of intellectual exchange. But perhaps the most vivid evidence comes from the travelers themselves. The detailed accounts of individuals like the Moroccan scholar and the Venetian merchant Marco Polo are priceless. They were not just describing places, they were chronicling the living network. This 30-year odyssey across the Islamic world and beyond gives us a ground-level view of the caravanserais, the scholarly debates in Delhi, and the functioning of the Mongol postal system. Marco Polo's descriptions, while debated, provide a snapshot of the economic and technological sophistication linking East and West. Their writings are the closest we get to a real-time log of the information highway. Beyond texts, we can trace the migration of specific technologies and artistic styles. The gradual westward movement of the stirrup, a simple device that revolutionized warfare and society, can be mapped along the steppe routes. The evolution of the Buddha's image, from its Greco-Indian origins to its serene Chinese form, paints a clear picture of artistic ideas adapting as they moved from oasis to oasis. Even something as universal as the game of chess shows this flow, its pieces and rules transforming as it traveled from India to Persia to the Islamic world, and finally to Europe. Each of these threads, the borrowed word, the annotated manuscript, the traveler's tale, the evolving artistic motif, is a single strand of evidence. By weaving them together, we begin to see the outline of the network itself, a vast, silent web that once pulsed with the most valuable cargo of all human thought. The true measure of this network was not just what it carried, but how fast it could move a single, urgent thought. While a merchant caravan moved at the deliberate, plodding rhythm of commerce, covering perhaps 15 to 25 miles in a full day, the state-sponsored courier systems were built for something else entirely, for the breathtaking speed of command. On the open stretches of the Mongol yam, a rider with the proper tablet could change horses at each relay station and maintain a gallop that covered 200 miles in a single day. That is a staggering pace, one that would not be reliably matched until the Pony Express in the American West some 600 years later. Imagine the difference this made. A crucial piece of military intelligence, a warning of an approaching army, could travel from the Mongolian capital to the distant frontiers in a week or two. That same journey, if entrusted to the regular flow of a merchant caravan, would have taken many months, rendering the information useless upon arrival. The yam was the fiber optic cable laid over the ancient dirt road, designed for one purpose, to collapse distance and time for those in power. Yet this astonishing speed existed within a world of profound and constant uncertainty. The courier's blistering pace was a theoretical maximum, an ideal that reality constantly challenged. Reliability was the fragile, human counterpoint to imperial ambition. The first and most formidable adversary was the environment itself. Seasonal sandstorms in the Arabian deserts could erase trails and choke the air for days, forcing even the most urgent messenger to hunker down in a caravanserai and wait. Monsoon rains in mountain passes could wash away bridges and turn roads to mud, halting all movement. The sheer physical toll on the messengers was immense. Riding at that relentless pace, day after day, across punishing terrain was an act of endurance that pushed both human and animal to their absolute limits. Illness or injury to a single rider could break the chain, delaying a message for a critical period. Beyond nature, human threats loomed. While the Pax suppressed large-scale banditry on the main routes, it never eliminated the risk entirely. Isolated stretches, especially in mountainous regions or remote deserts, were still hunting grounds for smaller, opportunistic groups who saw a lone courier as a target for his horse, his weapons, or the valuable message he might carry. Political instability was an even greater disruptor. A change in a local ruler, a rebellion in a province, or a conflict between tribes could instantly close a critical mountain pass or make an oasis town hostile territory. A courier bearing the seal of a deposed Khan might find his authority meaningless, his journey abruptly ended. The information highway, for all its sophistication, was not a digital network with guaranteed uptime. It was a living, breathing system of flesh, sweat, and trust, vulnerable to every whim of weather and every shift in the fragile peace between communities. Its true genius lay not in perfect reliability, but in its resilient redundancy. If one route was blocked by a storm or a conflict, knowledge could flow along another, slower but still vital, path. The caravan might be plodding, but it was persistent, and in its patient, collective memory, the whispers of the world found a way through. Alongside the philosophical texts and religious scrolls, a more urgent form of knowledge traveled the desert highways. Information itself was a tangible commodity, bought and sold with the same shrewd calculation as any bale of silk. For a merchant betting his entire fortune on a single caravan, knowledge was not just power, it was profit, and often the difference between ruin and riches. The most valuable intelligence was practical and immediate. What was the current price of pepper in the markets of Alexandria? Had a recent harvest in the Nile Delta failed, signaling a future spike in the price of grain? Was the mountain pass ahead safe, or had a local conflict made it impassable? This was the lifeblood of commerce, and merchants paid handsomely for it. They maintained networks of agents, trusted individuals stationed in key trading cities whose sole job was to gather this data and send it back along the caravan routes. A merchant in Samarkand, before packing his goods for the journey to Baghdad, would first consult the latest dispatches from his man on the ground there. This intelligence allowed him to pack exactly what was in demand and avoid carrying a product that had just flooded the market. The speed of this information was critical. The first merchant to know about a political shift that opened a new trade route, or a shipwreck that destroyed a competitor's cargo, could corner a market before anyone else even heard the news. This created a powerful economic incentive to build and maintain these far-flung webs of communication. A successful trading house was not just a collection of warehouses and camels, it was an early intelligence agency, with its own confidential couriers and coded messages moving within the larger flow of the caravans. The greatest profits, however, came from exclusive access, from knowing something no one else did. Imagine a merchant in Constantinople who, through his network, learns of a sudden political upheaval in a distant province that produces a rare spice. He knows the supply will be cut off for months. Without revealing his source, he quietly buys up all the existing stocks of that spice in every market he can reach. Months later, when the shortage becomes common knowledge and prices skyrocket, he sells his hoard for a staggering profit. This kind of speculation on information drove the entire system to become faster, more reliable, and more secretive. It transformed the Caravanserai from just a place of rest into a buzzing exchange floor for rumors and reports, where a whispered conversation in a shadowy corner could be worth more than the gold changing hands in the open courtyard. The desert highways carried faith and philosophy, but they were funded by the relentless, quiet trade in news. The very efficiency of these networks made them a target. For every ruler who sought to spread knowledge, another saw the caravan routes as a vulnerability, a conduit for dangerous ideas that had to be controlled or severed. The power to move information is also the power to intercept it. Imperial postal systems, while marvels of speed, were not private channels. The same courier who carried a military order could just as easily be carrying a secret message of rebellion, and states employed censors and spies specifically to monitor this flow. Messengers could be detained, their sealed packets opened and read by officials at key. A text deemed politically subversive or religiously heretical could be confiscated and destroyed before it ever reached its intended audience. Knowledge itself became a commodity to be monopolized. The most famous example is China's centuries-long guard of the secrets of sericulture, the production of silk. The empire maintained a ruthless monopoly, declaring the export of silkworm eggs or mulberry seeds a crime punishable by the most severe penalties. This was not merely an economic strategy, it was an act of information warfare, an attempt to control a technology that conveyed immense cultural prestige and wealth. For hundreds of years, the secret held, not because the caravan routes did not exist, but because the state successfully policed the nodes where such a small, vital piece of information could slip out. This control casts a long shadow over what we think we know. The historical record we have is overwhelmingly the record of what survived, of the texts that were deemed important enough by powerful institutions to copy and preserve, or benign enough to avoid the censor's fire. What is missing is immeasurable. Think of the vast ocean of oral history, the stories, songs, and local news that traveled on the breath of storytellers and merchants, but were never committed to parchment or paper. A market rumor from Cairo, a folk remedy shared in a Samarkand tavern, a ballad about a forgotten battle sung around a desert campfire. These lived only as long as the memory of those who heard them. When the last person who remembered the tale passed, that thread of the human story vanished forever. This ephemeral news was the true lifeblood of daily existence across continents, and almost all of it is lost to us. The fragility of the entire system was revealed when the guardians of the routes faltered. The collapse of a central power, like the fragmentation of the Mongol Empire or the decline of the Abbasid Caliphate, did not just cause political chaos. It could shatter the information highway itself. As large-scale security broke down, banditry would rise, making travel perilous. Caravanserais fell into disrepair. Relay stations for postal systems were abandoned. The safe, predictable corridors constricted and then closed. When this happened, the light of connection flickered and could go out for generations. Regions that had been in constant dialogue suddenly found themselves isolated. A scholar in Persia might no longer receive the latest astronomical tables from India. A merchant in Venice could lose all reliable news from the courts of Central Asia. Knowledge that had flowed for centuries now pooled in isolated reservoirs, stagnating or even forgetting its own origins. The desert wines still blew, but they no longer carried the same whispers. This is the haunting counterpoint to our story, a reminder that every highway, no matter how robust, can be blocked, and that the most profound conversations of the past are often the ones held in silence, now permanently beyond our hearing. But a new current began to flow, one that would eventually reroute the world's connections. While caravans inched across continents, ships were learning to conquer the sea. The rise of maritime trade along the Indian Ocean and later across the Atlantic presented a different model of exchange, one built on volume and velocity rather than intimate, prolonged contact. A single Portuguese carrack or an Arab dhow could carry the equivalent of an entire desert caravan's physical cargo in one voyage, moving silks, spices, and porcelain in quantities that land transport could never match. This shift toward the sea was a revolution in economic scale, but it came with a subtle social cost. The journey itself was different. A ship was a closed world for months, its crew and passengers often sharing a language, a culture, and a singular commercial purpose. They sailed from one port to another with few stops in between, their interaction with the open ocean consisting of weather and waves, not people. Upon arrival, they traded in bustling, cosmopolitan harbors like Calicut or Malacca, but these were endpoints not. The merchant disembarked, conducted his business in the foreign quarter, and reboarded, his contact with the local society often transactional and brief. Compare this to the desert caravan's reality. Its journey was not a point-to-point dash, but a slow unwinding of social fabric. It stopped at a dozen caravanserais and oases, each one forcing a mingling with a completely different group of travelers who had arrived from another direction. A merchant spent weeks or months in this rolling, multilingual society, sharing meals, dangers, and stories with people he would never have met in a port city tavern. The caravan did not just deliver him to a destination, it immersed him in the journey itself, creating countless unplanned moments for the exchange of news, techniques, and beliefs. The sea routes carried bulk and created empires, but the desert highways carried context and built understanding. They were the slow, deliberate conversation of the ancient world, where information was not just delivered, but lived with, debated, and absorbed along every mile of sand. The caravan's days as the world's main artery were numbered by a series of quiet revolutions. The first great challenge came not from the desert, but from the sea. For centuries, the Indian Ocean had its own vibrant trade networks, but they functioned alongside the overland routes, not in direct competition. This balance shattered with the European age of discovery. In the late 15th century, Portuguese and later Spanish, Dutch, and English navigators achieved something unprecedented. They mastered the art of reliable, long-distance oceanic travel. A ship like Deus could sail from Lisbon to the spice ports of India and back in a single year, a round trip that would have taken a caravan multiple years, if it could even manage the journey at all. The economic impact was immediate and profound. A single vessel could carry 1,000 times the cargo of a camel train, slashing the cost of transporting bulk goods like pepper, cloves, and textiles. Suddenly, the most lucrative flows of physical trade began to bypass the desert caravanserais entirely, diverting to coastal ports where European ships lay at anchor. This economic rerouting starved the overland system of its financial lifeblood. The wealthy merchant houses that once funded massive caravans and patronized caravanserais now invested in ships and warehouses by the sea. The slow, socially rich journey across continents began to seem like a costly relic, a riskier and less profitable way to move goods in a world now connected by sail. As maritime routes captured global trade, a second revolution targeted the very nature of information itself. For the creation of a book was a slow, expensive, centralized act. The manuscript economy we discussed earlier meant that books were rare treasures, and their distribution was tied directly to the caravan routes that carried these singular objects. That all changed in the mid-15th century with the printing press. This was not merely a new tool, it was a complete decentralization of knowledge production. Now, a single original text could be typeset once and then reproduced not in dozens, but in hundreds or even thousands of identical copies. The printing press broke the ancient link between a unique manuscript and a specific journey. Books became commodities that could be boxed and shipped in volume, more suited to the holds of ships than the panniers of camels. The center of gravity for knowledge shifted from the translation bureaus of Baghdad and the scriptoriums to the printing houses of Venice, Antwerp, and later London. Ideas could now spread with a speed and consistency the caravan network could never match. A scientific discovery published in Paris could be printed, shipped, and read in Copenhagen within months, creating a new, faster intellectual circuit that operated largely within Europe and its maritime empires, increasingly sidelining the older Afro Eurasian crossroads. The final, decisive blows to the caravan's role came in the 19th century, with the twin inventions of the telegraph and the railroad. These technologies did what the caravan could never do. They separated information completely from the physical human journey. Before the telegraph, news was literally carried on a person. It moved at the speed of a horse, a camel, or a ship. In 1844, the first public telegraph line transmitted a message instantly over a wire. Suddenly, a political event in London could be known in New York minutes later. The telegraph created a global nervous system that operated at the speed of light, rendering the weeks or months of caravan travel for news utterly obsolete. It was the ultimate abstraction of the information highway, removing the human storyteller, the merchant with a rumor, entirely from the equation. The railroad complemented this by revolutionizing the movement of people and goods overland, but on a scale and speed that dwarfed the caravan. Iron tracks and steam locomotives could cross continents in days, not months, carrying vast quantities of cargo and passengers in sealed, climate-controlled cars. They followed engineered paths, not ancient trails dictated by oases. The railroad was a network of pure efficiency, with no need for the social mixing, the linguistic negotiation, or the shared hardship that had characterized the caravan journey. It delivered you to a destination, but it did not immerse you in the journey itself. Together, the telegraph and the railroad created a new paradigm of connection, one based on instantaneity and volume, that finally superseded the ancient, organic, and profoundly human system of the desert caravan. The winds still blew across the Silk Road, but they now carried only silence, as the world's conversations hummed along copper wires and iron rails. Yet the caravan's silence does not mean its work is finished. We live today in a world built by those ancient whispers, a landscape of shared knowledge so familiar we no longer see its origins. Look up at the night sky. The names of many of its guides, like Aldebaran and Betelgeuse, are Arabic, carried across deserts by astronomers who map the heavens from Baghdad to Samarkand. When you visit a doctor, the very language of healing bears the imprint of those journeys. Terms like retina and cornea come from Latin, but they traveled there through Arabic translations of Greek texts, preserved and enhanced in the houses of wisdom that dotted the trade routes. Our global vocabulary of science and mathematics is a palimpsest, a document written over many times, with the foundational layers inscribed in the sands of those highways. This shared lexicon is the quiet, enduring echo of a conversation that once spanned continents. It is proof that ideas, once set in motion along the right paths, never truly disappear. They simply become part of the common ground we all walk upon. The artistic world we admire tells the same story of synthesis. Walk into a great mosque in Istanbul or a palace in India, and you will see a visual language born of convergence. The intricate geometric patterns that adorn walls, the soaring arches that seem to defy weight, the elegant calligraphy weaving scripture into art, these are not the product of one culture alone. They are a syncretic masterpiece, blending Persian sensibility, Arab script, Byzantine engineering, and Central Asian motifs, a style that evolved because artists and architects themselves traveled, their ideas flowing as freely as the pigments on their brushes. Even the great religious traditions that now claim global followings, Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam, achieved that status not through isolation, but through the relentless person-to-person movement these roots enabled. A faith could not remain a local secret if its pilgrims and monks walked for years alongside merchants and diplomats, sharing its teachings at every caravanserai and oasis. The very concept of a world religion is a testament to the desert's connective power. So when we speak of our modern interconnected world, of the internet or global trade, we are not describing a sudden invention. We are acknowledging the latest chapter in a very old story. The digital networks that flash with data are the direct descendants of the Yam courier system, just as the global marketplace is an evolution of the Silk Road's bazaars. Our instinct to share, to learn from distant sources, and to build upon the ideas of others was not born in a Silicon Valley, but forged in the crucible of vast, silent spaces, where survival depended on connection, and the greatest treasure was a story not yet heard. The caravan routes have faded, but the world they wove together remains, a living legacy written in the stars above us, the words we speak, and the deep human yearning to reach beyond the horizon. This was not a system built for speed, but for resilience. For thousands of years, the caravan routes wove a slow, intercontinental web of knowledge, stitching the vast expanse of Afro Eurasia into a singular zone of intellectual cross-fertilization. The silk and spices were merely the visible threads, the tangible excuse for the journey. The true fabric was woven from the conversations in the caravanserai, the translated manuscripts in the monastic library, the news carried by the pilgrim and the diplomat. This network created something unprecedented, a continuous, generational dialogue between civilizations that had no other way to speak. China's innovations could simmer in the scholarly pots of Baghdad, be seasoned with Greek philosophy and Indian mathematics, and produce a new recipe for understanding the world, which would then be carried back out along the very same roads. This was not a simple transfer. It was a constant, creative synthesis, a global conversation moving at the pace of a camel's gait. The desert highways became the indispensable nervous system of the pre-modern world. They carried the signals that allowed distant empires to react, that enabled faiths to find new hearts, and that allowed a discovery in one corner of the continent to become the foundation for progress in another. They facilitated the dialogues that shaped civilizations, not through conquest, but through the quiet, persistent exchange of a story, a number, a prayer, or a blueprint. So the next time you look at a historical map, do not see the great deserts as empty voids, as blank spaces between the marked cities and empires. See them instead as they truly were, as etched channels of human connection. Every line crossing that blank space represents 1,000 journeys, 1,000,000 whispered conversations, and the patient, relentless flow of ideas that built the world we inherited. The silence of the sand is an illusion. If you listen closely, you can still hear the echo of the caravan, the soft, enduring whisper that connected us all.